So, Sonic 2 on Game Gear and Sega Master System. If the groaning I did prior wasn't an indicator of things to come, with my dual reviews of Sonic 1 in the record books, I'll continue forward, first looking at Sonic 2's 8-bit counterpart. For this review, I'll be looking at the Game Gear release. Why the inferior version, you ask? Well, this was the very first one I grew up with, and I wouldn't pick up the Master System release until years later. I do have a ton of memories with this one, and I figured, well, with the 8-bit Sonic 2 debuting a month prior to its Genesis counterpart, I figured why not go over this release first. As I mentioned on a previous review, I managed to get my hands on a Sega Game Gear well after picking up my Game Boy. It wouldn't be until the summer of '95 that I would manage to finally score one, and I did so at none other than my local Toys R Us. Around this time, the Game Gear was already beginning to spiral into obscurity, but surprisingly enough, I was still able to score some late release titles for it, most notably Tails Adventures and Sonic Drift 2, which I will eventually get into as this marathon continues on. I was one of the fortunate ones that picked up my Game Gear with Sonic 2 packaged along with it, and by doing so, how did I end up liking it? Well, from the box art alone, there was a lot of false advertisement going on. I was one of the many that got suckered into the iconic imagery of Sonic and Tails riding out on those sweet hang gliders and thinking this was going to be something epic, similar to the Genesis release of Sonic 2. If only an 11-year-old knew what they were in for. This wasn't Sonic 2 on the Genesis, no, this wasn't even Sonic 1 on the Game Gear. This is a different beast altogether. Sonic 1 on the Sega Game Gear and Sega Master System was a unique experience altogether. Taking inspiration from its Genesis counterpart, it was ultimately built from the ground up. The 8-bit release of Sonic 2 was handled very much the same this time around, only unlike our first 8-bit journey developed by Ancient, Sega would go on to employ a new development team to see the sequel through. Aspect would take the reins for this 8-bit rendition of Sonic 2, and they did so by going at it alone. This time around, there was no supervision coming from the higher-ups at the Sega Technical Institute. Most likely, they were too focused on development of the Genesis release. This new 8-bit Sonic 2 looked gorgeous, there's no denying that, but more importantly, would the gameplay feel as good as our first outing with Ancient Corp? Well, before we decide that, let's dive into a few questions that are still left unanswered. With the Master System release of Sonic 2 debuting a month prior to the Genesis release of Sonic 2, where does this story fall into place on the timeline? Is this a prequel or a sequel to the events of Sonic 2? Well, I guess that's for us to ultimately spectate. After Sonic put an end to Eggman's latest schemes for a Robo-World Order, peace has once again returned to South Island. With the Chaos Emeralds back in their rightful place, the island again quickly flourishes and Sonic embarks on a much-needed vacation. However, when he returns home, things feel off and he sees no sign of his friends in sight. Upon discovering a note written by Tails, he finds that Eggman has once again found a way to rise to power and found the perfect opportunity to abduct Tails and the rest of the island's inhabitants in his absence. Tails goes on to further explain that Eggman has locked our two-tailed sidekick away in a far-off location coined the Crystal Egg. In order to reach this hidden location, Sonic must manage to find all 6 of the Chaos Emeralds for the path to be revealed. To make matters worse, Eggman also goes on a Dr. Wily tear as he states that Eggman has designed 6 fearsome robot masters, master robots, to thwart off our Hedgehog throughout each zone. Sonic takes off without hesitation, journeying back across South Island, uncovering the Chaos Emeralds and rescuing his two-tailed companion from captivity deep inside the Crystal Egg. Sonic 2's gameplay relies heavily on the core fundamentals that its 8-bit predecessor did, with much of the experience relying heavily on the side-scrolling platforming confined to its limited hardware. Sonic returns with his arsenal of slick tricks as he spin attacks his way through a barrage of badniks. He still has a bloodthirst for gold rings, smashing through perfectly good CRT displays, all while maneuvering through a plethora of creative stage tropes and gimmicky zones. Yet here, the Aspect team presents us with a unique twist on the way we journey across them. How well the team implemented these tropes is entirely up to speculation, but in large part, mastering them is key to successfully transitioning from zone to zone, uncovering the Chaos Emeralds along the way. Just like with our 8-bit Sonic 1 experience, the Chaos Emeralds are again scattered throughout the various zones, and depending if you can manage to find them all, will drastically change the outcome of your journey. Seriously, you saw that opening scene alone, right? Eggman isn't playing around this time. He straight up kidnaps Tails from the very start. To further dive into the story and the gameplay features that come along with it, we need to dissect these zones one by one to truly put things into perspective. The box art of this game is misleading as all hell, with Tails literally abducted from the opening cutscene. Spoiler alert, you won't be getting the chance to play as him at any point of your adventure. Even with our two-tailed fox depicted across the cover of each and every title card, seriously, don't get your hopes up. I really don't understand the point of doing this, only to further piss off your fan base. Maybe these title cards are supposed to be tiny memories unlocked from the many adventures shared between the two. Regardless, it's more of a tease than anything else. Maybe there were plans to incorporate Tails in at some point, or there were possibly hardware restrictions that permitted them to do so, but either way, we need to move forward and take a look at these brand new zones that await. Our adventure opens embarking on a rocky ride throughout the underground zone, hopping from railcart to railcart, navigating your way through the subterranean tunnel systems. It's a fun opening act that will find you smashing through various breakable walls, utilizing your spin attack to uncover hidden areas. I almost get a Marble Zone vibe from the level design, rewarding you for the exploration that will be done deep inside the caverns. It's a pretty iconic first couple of acts, but after that, the difficulty will slowly start to ramp up. One of the primary reasons I didn't finish this game as a kid was the frustratingly difficult Stage 1 boss battle. Underground Zone Act 3 pits Sonic up against Robotnik's first master robot, the Pitmaster. The screen crunch alone makes this fight crippling and becomes an endurance round, dodging the various cannonballs Eggman will drop down below that you must maneuver past to damage the robot. It's almost impossible to do this without rings, as you can't see the trajectory of the balls landing, switching up the speed as the fight wages on. As a kid, I would typically rage quit this game after countless attempts at this. Sky High Zone is a very creative stage that incorporates many new ideas into the series. Looking back now, this would have been a great addition to any of the mainline Sonic titles. You soar across the windswept skies of South Island from the very top of the lush green hills to the high reaches of the clouds. The major drawback, however, is that the stage design itself doesn't align well at all with the gliders. The development team needed a bit more time implementing this into the stage collectively. If you don't understand the glider physics from the very launch, you are instantly taking a plunge to your death. With a game like Sonic 2 on the Game Gear, you can't afford to blow through lives. With the amount of time needed to get comfortable with the glider physics, you won't be able to recover from the loss of lives taken, and that's a shame. You have to hold up or down on the D-pad, gaining momentum as you soar the skies, looking for the perfect gust of wind to higher travels. It's a fun idea, but there should have been some given instruction prior to taking that initial leap of faith. The clouds themselves are painfully difficult to land on, and there isn't the slightest implication of where to gather your footing in order to travel across them to locate the second Chaos Emerald. You will need to time the glider perfectly to get into range to reach the appropriate clouds to nab the Chaos Emerald. Again, I appreciate the effort placed here, but the concepts are incorporated so terribly. I'd like to see the poor bloke that actually tested this stage out and said, this was good to go. I smell bullshit. The second Robot Master, or excuse me, Master Robot, isn't bad at all compared to your first outing, and going forward, once you understand the robot's patterns, the rest of them are quite simple to defeat. Sonic will eventually splash down into Aqua Lake Zone, where you can pull off some fun water tricks via the spin attack. It's quite fun to skip across the sea waves in efforts to stick to higher grounds for a safe path of travel. Act 2, however, is submerged completely underwater, and you travel through high-speed warp tubes to navigate your way through the aquatic labyrinth. This Labyrinth Zone 2.0 is a much easier experience overall compared to its Sonic 1 counterpart, and has some fun unique segments such as the giant air bubble devices that encapsulate Sonic, floating him upwards towards higher grounds. This act pits you up against a robotic seal that will incorporate Sonic into his next stage routine. You can easily telegraph his movements and drop down on top of him for a crushing grand finale. This adventure will find your way back to the beloved Green Hills, this time traveling to the peaks of the mountain ranges dubbed the Green Hills. Here the outskirts of the lush green island is surrounded by rolling plains and peaks filled with springs and loops to venture through. The screen crunch here will put Sonic straight on his ass. If not careful, you'll gain momentum so quickly you won't be able to see the many oncoming hazards ahead. This is where again the Game Gear port really takes a hit and will have you looking for a Master System copy in no time for a future playthrough. The main visual difference with this new rendition of Green Hill is a much more straightforward level layout, combined with the various ramps and loops that will dangerously keep you guessing your every move. Gimmick Mountain Zone takes you through the caverns of a mountain carved out in the latest Eggman tech. As you dive deeper into the caverns searching out the Chaos Emeralds, you maneuver through the maze-like industrial architecture, onboarding rail carts for travel across the twisted conveyor belts. The flywheels were some of the most fun I had up until this point and were easy to run along, timing your jumps accordingly to climb throughout, escaping death and clearing the many pits that lie beneath you. As you push forward, you reach Eggman's hidden base, the Scrambled Egg Zone. Eggman's latest headquarters, carved from the caves located in the darkest pits of South Island. This stage is chock full of beginner traps, and most notably the bullshit transport tubes that launch you to and from with little to no insight on where they take you. They could lead you to higher grounds within the base or drop you off a ledge into a bed of spikes. It's a chaotic guessing game, and the entire zone is terribly flawed by design. This is where the game begins to again go off the rails, and where Sega should have managed to pull the resources together to oversee this project through. It's one of my absolute least favorite stages in the entire classic series. This most likely is the make or break point for your adventure. If you manage to make it through to the end of this shit show, you're come face to face with Mecha Sonic 1.0, who is assigned with holding the very last of the Chaos Emeralds. Even he wasn't confident burying it deep inside the stage itself. In the event you manage to recover the other 5 Chaos Emeralds, you will be rewarded with the final emerald upon defeating Mecha Sonic. If you didn't manage to recover them up until this point, your adventure ends here. You got the bad ending, and it can really get you down, depicting Sonic running off aimlessly on his own with the loss of Tails looming over him from the far-off night skies, depicting a lone constellation of Tails. However, if you did manage to recover the emeralds, the true final act is revealed and the curtains are pulled back on Eggman's plan. The path is clear and the crystal egg emerges, granting us the location of our long-lost partner. Sonic arrives just in time to lay waste to Eggman's glossy new crystallized fortress. This is a true glass house of his own, as Sonic gives zero shits, shattering his way through Robotnik's shimmering translucent domain, searching out his partner in crime. After maneuvering through the literal tragedy that was Scrambled Egg Zone, this final act feels almost rewarding in a sense. The stage layout is quite simplistic in design, dodging the occasional spike bed along the way. You encounter some very fun enemies here, and the rotating discs are a great addition to the final acts. The final showdown with Robotnik is another ballbuster of an endurance round, a ringless battle taking place inside Eggman's lightning chamber. Trying to get a hit in is almost strictly luck based, taking a leap of faith when entering the chamber as electricity fades, attempting to land a critical blow on Eggman, all while gyrating energy bolts float around the chamber. The strategy here is stick and move, diving back into the tubes for safety as he powers up the chamber's electricity and energy bolts for another go. As Eggman's chambers come shattering down, Eggman makes his grand escape once again, headed for another one of his conveniently placed escape pods. As Sonic gazes on in disbelief, he stands alone, shattered. Just then, the teleporter begins to function again, and as Sonic looks on eagerly, his two-tailed buddy appears in the flesh, released from Robotnik's clutches. The ending of our story is quite touching and truly signifies the importance of collecting the Chaos Emeralds. I do enjoy the greater emphasis on collecting them here in Sonic 2, changing the course of events and reuniting with our buddy Tails. It's a great ending scene, with the two also depicted as constellations from our galaxy high above the midnight skies. Sonic 2 aesthetically is a beautiful looking game for the Sega Game Gear. The upgraded sprite quality goes a long way here. Each zone traveled through demands a greater attention to detail that makes this adventure feel that much more grand in scale. I never played through a stage and felt as if I wasn't entertained by the quirky new zones presented to me. From the very start, each zone had a unique feel to them, and the gimmicks all brought something fresh and new to their stage themes. Although they weren't for the large part incorporated into the zones well, I still give these stages the benefit of the doubt. I would have liked to see many of these concepts fleshed out a bit more. I give them somewhat of a pass because they were a product of their time. Riding along the underground rail carts from the jump was an awesome way to get the adventure popping off. I appreciate where the team was going with the use of the new hang glider features, and to be honest, if they would have given us a landing strip for means to practice getting accustomed to them, then I think they would have been a far greater success. Traveling throughout the underwater labyrinth was fun via the large air bubbles, aiding Sonic by bobbing and weaving across the booby-trapped hallways, and having the opportunity to skip across the water segments gave you a greater means of travel throughout. Even the flywheels throughout Gimmick Mountain were executed quite well and were easy enough to run across to safety. Now, as I mentioned, I can't say every gimmick and stage theme were created equally. In fact, I really have no words for Scrambled Egg Zone. I think this stage itself is complete shit. designed with little to no rhyme or reason for a large part of the tube's layout, with the only rewarding perk being the fight with Mecha Sonic 1.0, the tubes were just straight chaotic in design, and I feel as if the development team knew this because they made no effort whatsoever to even place a Chaos Emerald in the zone alone. With that said, the screen crunch again is the biggest reason to not revisit the Game Gear version. I would recommend the Master System version to anyone who has the means to play it, but for most of us, the easiest way to enjoy these would be some of the newer collections that have come available over the years. I don't understand what is holding Sega back from remastering many of these 8-bit Sonic titles. At least update the aspect ratios. I would even be willing to go out of the way and pay for them individually if they added some additional value to them. With that said, our time with Sonic's 8-bit sequel comes to a close. When we return, we will look at no other than Sonic the Hedgehog 2 on Sega Genesis.